selling its family members. Watch out for problematic assets like partnership interests that have UBITs and things like that. And then this is why it's important to have the right trustee. Was the trust actually administered in accordance with its terms? We had court cases and IRS rulings where the CRT was supposed to pay out 5% a year, and that nothing was paid for 3 years. So they say, well, because you didn't administer it properly, you've lost the eligibility, and now it's a taxable trust. So get a competent trustee who can handle it. Practical steps, just picking the trustee, picking the charities, picking the type of CRT. One way to do it is a standalone CRT. Just sign and date it, and then on the beneficiary form of the retirement account, say that the beneficiary is so-and-so. In fact, please put in Christopher Hoyt. Christopher Hoyt, trustee of the Cheerleader Trust, dated February 25th, 2020. And then if it's a 401k plan, be sure you talk to the administrator that this is going to work. So with that, let's turn it over. We've had a few questions. Russell, may I start with you? First of all, Russell, you mentioned that if there's no designated beneficiary, then you have to take the money out in 5 years or the ghost life expectancy. But what if I have an IRA payable to my 2 children? Each of them gets 45%, and a charity gets 10%. Well, there, most of the money goes to human beings, but I have one beneficiary that's not a human being. Is that the nomenclature for I have no designated beneficiary because there's at least one beneficiary that's not a human being?
Yeah, under the regulations that we have today, which obviously predate the Secure Act, if there's one charity that's included as a beneficiary, along with some individuals as beneficiaries of a given IRA, then that is treated as a situation where there is no designated beneficiary, despite there being individuals in the picture. And so the rules on distributions involving no designated beneficiary would come into play.
And that's that crazy nomenclature, that no designated beneficiary. Well, I got 2 of them, but if you have just one beneficiary that's not a human being, we call it someone with no designated beneficiary.
Right, just treat it as having no designated beneficiary in that situation.
And Russell, one more question for you. We have somebody who's like 70 years old, has a 60-year-old sister, and has a 65-year-old brother. This 70-year-old has 2 siblings who are within 10 years of age of each other. So the question we're having is, that person wants to name the 68-year-old sister as the beneficiary. Now, she isn't eligible designated beneficiary because she's within 10 years. But then he wants to say, if my sister dies, then it goes to my 65-year-old brother, who also isn't eligible designated beneficiary because he's within 10 years of age of both the brother and the sister. But are you reading it that whereas the sister, who is the primary beneficiary, can take it out of her life expectancy, when she dies, does the 10-year rule apply to the brother, or can the brother take it out over his life expectancy?
Well, as I read the rules that we have today, I think the 10-year rule would apply upon the death of that first beneficiary. Perhaps we will get some relief on that under regulations whenever those come out, but that's sort of the literal reading that I have.
And that's what I read too, is because in the statute itself, 401A9H, as in happy, it provides that when an eligible designated beneficiary dies, the 10-year clock starts ticking.
Right.
The statute doesn't have an exemption for EDBs, but maybe the regulations will. And Kelly, we have a question here for you. Do conduit trusts need to be amended to provide for payments over 10 years, or will the custodian adjust?
What I believe this person's asking is, typically conduit trusts will force the required minimum distribution out to the beneficiary. And under these new rules, if the beneficiary of that trust is a designated beneficiary that doesn't have any eligibility lifetime payouts, those IRA proceeds will pay out immediately to the beneficiary when the trustee takes it. So if the trustee is required to take the benefits within 10 years, it'll immediately pay out to that beneficiary. Now, I think there are some questions as to, well, can maybe you can require the trustee to not take any payments for 10 years and then at 10 years start accumulating. But I think if you change the language to say that, I think then the trust would have to pay the income tax on withdrawing that IRA. And so who would you rather have pay the income tax? Is it the beneficiary, or is it the trust that's taxed at currently the 37% rate? And so I think if your client's goal is creditor protection, changing the quote unquote conduit trust to kind of become an accumulation trust after 10 years, if the goal is creditor protection, that might be a good thing. But if the goal is, to pay the least amount of tax possible, I would imagine that you may want to change the conduit trust provisions a little bit to tweak it, but that you'd want that to immediately pay out to the beneficiary. And I don't think it'll be the custodian's job. Sorry.
If a minor child is an IRA beneficiary, can the required distributions be made just to a UTMA account, to a custodian, under the Uniform Transfer to Minors Act? Or do we need a trust, or what should we do?
I mean, if your client's okay with your child taking the distributions over the child's life expectancy until they're of majority age, and then mandatorily taking it within 10 years, I think a UTMA account or UGMA account might not be a bad idea. I mean, it obviously depends on your client. It depends on the amount of the IRA going to that child. But one way to better protect it, and you'll have to potentially pay higher tax rate, is to leave it to a trust. That can be a conduit trust that takes it the same way over the minor's life expectancy, but then it flips into that 10 years. So I don't think a UTMA account is necessarily a bad thing. And it could create a little bit more flexibility for the child.
I agree, and also because this does not apply to a minor child, period. Like a grandchild does not qualify. And so for a minor child, your client is in their 30s or 40s. And the balances are pretty small at that point. So that a UTMA account is pretty unlikely that they're going to pass. It's just a possibility. A UTMA account might be the most cost efficient for that situation. And Kelly, another question for you. If the beneficiary of an accumulation trust is an adult child who's not disabled, if the beneficiary of an accumulation trust is limited to issue of grantor, spouse of issue, and issue of grantor siblings, has a limited power of appointment that excludes non-individual beneficiaries such as charities and estates, does that create a problem for determining if there are identifiable beneficiaries? The trust would be a designated beneficiary and must pay out within the 10-year rule. This is question number 21 here.
Very good question. I may follow up with that with that person who asked that question, but I think that I think that would be a mandatory 10-year payout. I think the question is it a 5-year payout or is it a 10-year payout?
And one last question about out of time.
I think it's 10 years.
Okay.
But I'll follow up with her. Tell her to send me your email address.
All right. In the first example where Ellen is the beneficiary, what happens if Ellen dies, if the beneficiary dies before taking out the IRA inheritance?
I believe that if Ellen dies before she takes out all of the IRA benefits, that the successor beneficiary steps